The ship was 3 months past dead, and Cole Maddox knew it the way a butcher knows a carcass, by the smell, by the weight, by the way nothing fought back when he cut into it. He drifted the hatchet close, killing the engines 200 meters out, and letting momentum carry him the rest of the way, because fuel cost money, and money was a story he told himself at night, to stay scared enough to keep working. The derelict hung in neutral space, like something the universe had forgotten to clean up. A long, dark shape against a field of stars that did not care about it, or him, or the docking fees he owed on 3 separate stations. Fan-goddamn-tastic, he muttered, pulling up the scan results on a screen held together with electrical tape and a prayer he did not believe in. The broker had called it a standard salvage. Dead ship, no beacon, no registry, no owner coming to argue about who got to strip the bones. The scan said otherwise. Composition was wrong for human manufacture, and wrong for any of the 6 alien species whose junk Cole had spent 15 years picking through. It was Kelthani. He sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with a sound in the walls at 3 in the morning, still, quiet, hoping you imagined it. The Kelthani did not leave ships in neutral space. The Kelthani did not leave ships anywhere. Their technology was biological, half-grown and half-built, and when a vessel was decommissioned, they did not scrap it. They fed it back to the fleet, like a body returning to soil. A Kelthani ship floating dead and dark in unclaimed space was not salvage. It was a message or a trap, or both. Cole went in anyway because the docking fees were not going to negotiate with his sense of self-preservation. He suited up in the airlock, checking seals with fingers that moved on autopilot, while the rest of him did the thing he always did before boarding a dock. Ship. He counted bolts. 14 on the inner hatch, 6 on the helmet ring, 2 on each glove clamp. The numbers meant nothing. They kept his hands from shaking. The derelict's hull gave way to his cutting torch easier than it should have, and the air inside was breathable, which meant the biological systems were still ticking on some deep reptile brain level, even though everything else had powered down. The corridors were smooth and curved, grown rather than welded, and they pulsed with a faint warmth that Cole felt through his gloves. He cataloged as he moved: bulkhead composition, conduit routing, panel thickness. Because if he was cataloging, he was working, and if he was working, he was not remembering the last time he walked a dark corridor on a ship that was supposed to be empty. That was 3 years ago. That was the crew. That was a door he welded shut inside his own head, and he was not opening it tonight. Ship's interior was vast and strange, and organized around a central chamber that Cole guessed was either a bridge or a cathedral, because the Kelthani did not seem to recognize the difference. In the center of that chamber, raised on a platform of something that looked like bone but felt like warm glass, sat a cryopod. It was open, empty, had been for what looked like decades based on the crystalline residue along the interior seals. Cole ran his scanner over it, and the readings came back scrambled. Half the data was in Kelthani biological format, and the other half was in standard human medical encoding. That was not possible. Kelthani technology and human technology did not talk to each other, not on a hardware level, not on a software level, not on any level that Cole had encountered in 15 years of pulling alien ships apart with his bare hands and a cutting torch. He knelt beside the pod and found the inscription. Translation software chewed on it for 30 seconds and spat out fragments, most of it garbage, alien grammar twisted into shapes that English refused to hold. But one cluster came through clean. A name. Not his name, but the surname was Maddox. Cole stared at it. The ship breathed around him, warm and dark and patient. He pulled the data chip from the pod's base, a small thing, dense with information he could not read yet, but would learn to, and he stood up and turned toward the corridor that would take him back to the airlock, and the hatchet, and the version of his life where this had not happened. He made it 4 steps. The ship shuddered, not from damage, from contact. Something had docked with the derelict from outside, and the vibration traveled through the living hull, like a heartbeat resuming after a long pause. Cole pulled up his wrist scanner. 12 ships, 12 Calthani warships had dropped out of fold space in a ring around the derelict, and the nearest one was already extending a boarding bridge that attached to the hull like a root finding soil. He had maybe 90 seconds before they were inside. He gripped the data chip in his fist and ran his other hand along the corridor wall, not for balance, but because the wall was warm and alive, and it was the only thing in this situation that was not actively trying to decide what to do with him. The airlock at the far end of the corridor opened before he reached it. Not because he triggered it, because they triggered it from outside. 3 Calthani stood in the doorway. They were tall, 7 feet maybe more, with bone-white plating along their arms and shoulders, and bioluminescent veins that pulsed a faint violet beneath skin that was almost translucent. They carried weapons, but the weapons were not raised. The one in front, an officer based on the markings Cole had seen in salvage databases, looked at him with eyes like crushed sapphire, and spoke in a language that sounded like a cello being played inside a thunderstorm. Cole's translator caught up after a 2-second delay. "You are the human," the officer said. "Generally, yeah," Cole said, because his mouth had never once consulted his survival instincts before opening. The officer did not react to the joke. "You will come with us," the officer said, and the phrasing was not a question and not a threat. It was a fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone describing gravity. "Am I being arrested?" Cole asked. "You are being summoned." "By who?" The officer's bioluminescence flickered, a pattern Cole did not recognize, but that felt in some gut-level mammalian way like reverence. "The Queen." Cole looked at the 3 aliens in the doorway, at the warfleet visible through the viewport behind them, at the data chip in his fist, with a dead man's name on it. "P. Well," he said. "P. That's new. 710. They did not put him in chains. That was the first thing Cole noticed, and the second thing was that the absence of chains was somehow worse, because chains had rules. And this polite escort through a ship that breathed and hummed and grew around him like a living throat, this had no rules he could read. The flagship was a cathedral that had eaten a city. The corridors were wide enough for 3 Calthani to walk side by side, and the walls curved upward into vaulted ceilings that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, violet and deep blue, shifting in patterns that Cole's brain kept trying to read as language. The floor was warm beneath his boots. Not heated, warm, the way skin is warm, and he tried not to think about the fact that he was walking on something that might technically be alive. The escort, 4 guards now, the officer from the derelict, plus 3 who had joined at the docking bridge, moved with a precision that was not military so much as choreographic, each step landing in a rhythm that Cole suspected was instinctive, coded into whatever passed for Calthani muscle memory. They did not speak to him. They did not look at him. They looked at each other, and their bioluminescence flickered in patterns that Cole was increasingly certain was conversation happening in a frequency he was not invited to. He catalogued as he walked. Junction points, conduit clusters, structural seams where the grown material met the fabricated. Because the alternative was thinking about where he was going, and he was not ready for that yet. The throne room, and it was a throne room. There was no other word for a space that large and that deliberately intimidating, opened at the end of a corridor that widened like a funnel, pulling everything toward a single focal point. The ceiling was gone. Or rather, the ceiling was transparent, and through it Cole could see the stars and the dark shapes of the warfleet, holding formation around the flagship, like a fist that had not yet decided whether to close. The court was assembled. Hundreds of Kelthani lined the chamber in concentric arcs, their bioluminescence dimmed to a low, steady pulse that made the room feel like the inside of a sleeping animal. They were watching him. Every pair of sapphire eyes in that room tracked Cole Maddox as he walked the central aisle toward the far end where the throne sat. Not built, not placed, but grown from the ship itself. A structure of bone-white material and violet veins that rose from the floor like a tree that had decided to become furniture. And on it sat the queen. Vashra Kelthani was 7 feet of authority wrapped in silence. 4 arms, the upper pair resting on the throne's armrests, with the stillness of someone who had practiced being still for centuries. The lower pair folded across her midsection in a gesture that Cole's mammalian brain read as self-contained, closed, a door with no handle. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, the bioluminescent veins beneath it pulsing a deep violet that was darker than any other Kelthani in the room, a frequency that Cole suspected meant rank, or age, or power, or all 3. Her face was not human, but it was arranged close enough to human that the differences hit harder. The 2 wide cheekbones, the jawline that tapered to a point no human skull would produce, the eyes that were not blue, but were the color blue wished it could be, deep and fractured and old. She looked at Cole the way a geologist looks at a fault line, with recognition, with patience, with the certain knowledge that the ground was about to move. She spoke 1 sentence. You wear his face, and you carry his blood. You are the mate line returned. Cole's translator delivered it flat, stripped of whatever tonal architecture the Kelthani language carried. And even so, the words landed in the silent chamber, like stones dropped into still water. He stood there. The entire court was watching. The queen's bioluminescence was steady, the only steady light in a room full of flickering. "Ma'am," Cole said, because his brain had defaulted to the politeness subroutine his mother had installed in him 30 years ago and never updated. "I think there's been a mistake." She did not respond to him. She did not need to. An advisor shorter than the queen, older perhaps, with bioluminescence so faint it looked like veins of dying starlight, stepped forward and addressed Cole in a voice that his translator rendered as clinical, precise, and completely devoid of interest in Cole's opinion about any of this. "The Kelthani bonded through a mechanism called the Ankai," the advisor explained, "a biological genetic recognition system that identified compatible pairs across the species boundary. Boundaries entirely. 35 years ago, a human male had triggered the Ankai response in Vashra Kelthani. This was unprecedented, and it was also irreversible. The bond, once recognized, was not a choice, but a biological fact, like gravity or hunger or the need to breathe. The human was bonded to the queen. He lived in the Dominion for 2 cycles. He fathered an heir. Then he disappeared. The Dominion searched, not publicly, because the existence of a human mate to the queen was a political complexity that made wars look simple. But they searched with every resource available to an empire that spanned 41 star systems. They found nothing. For 35 years they found nothing, until a salvager named Maddox boarded a derelict ship in neutral space and pulled a data chip from a cryopod that should not have existed. Cole listened to all of this with the focused calm of a man disarming a bomb. Not because he was not terrified, but because terror was a luxury that required free time, and he had none. "The human who was bonded to the queen," he said, and his voice was even, and his hands were in his pockets, where no one could see them, gripping the data chip so hard the edges cut into his palm. "What was his name?" The advisor looked at the queen. The queen's upper right hand moved, a small gesture, a permission. "Elias," the advisor said. "Elias Maddox." Cole did not move. Elias Maddox was his father. Elias Maddox had died in a mining accident on Titan when Cole was 2 years old. That was the story. That was the record. That was the thing Cole's mother had told him, with a voice that never wavered, because it had already broken in private, long before she had to say it out loud. His father had not been in an alien empire. His father had not bonded with a queen. His father had not fathered an alien heir, except the data chip in his hand said otherwise, and the queen on the throne was looking at him with eyes that had been waiting 35 years for someone who wore a dead man's face. "I need a minute," Cole said. No one gave him a minute. The chamber doors at the far end opened, and the court parted, a ripple of bodies and dimmed light, and someone walked through. She was tall, taller than Cole by a foot at least, and built with the long-limbed elegance of her mother, the bone-white plating along her shoulders catching the bioluminescent light of the chamber and throwing it back in fractured patterns. Her skin was translucent in the Kelthani way, the veins beneath it pulsing violet, but softer, lighter, like a frequency that could not quite decide what it was. From the forehead up she was her mother's daughter. The wide cheekbones, the swept-back cranial plating, the eyes that held too much light. From the cheekbones down, she was looking at Cole with his own face, jaw, his mouth, too wide, too stubborn, set in exactly the expression Cole saw in the mirror every morning when he was deciding whether the day was going to be a problem. His eyes, his father's eyes, which were his eyes, staring back at him from a face that was half alien royalty and half a dead man from Titan. Sarah Kelthani stopped 10 feet from him. She did not speak to him. She did not look at him the way the court did, with curiosity or reverence or political calculation. She looked at him the way you look at a crack in a wall you have been staring at your entire life. The crack you always knew was there. The one you told yourself was just the light, or just the angle, or just your imagination. She turned to her mother. So it is true. Not a question. The queen's bioluminescence pulsed once, deep, slow, a rhythm that Cole felt in his chest, like a second heartbeat. Sarah turned back to Cole. 3 seconds that lasted a geological age. Then she walked past him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, and she did not say another word. Cole stood in the throne room of an alien empire, with a data chip cutting into his palm, and his dead father's name ringing in his ears, and his own face walking away from him, on legs that were 7 feet long and belonged to a princess he had not known existed 5 minutes ago. Well, he said to no one. The quarters they gave him had a ceiling that glowed, not with installed lights. The ceiling itself was bioluminescent, a living membrane stretched across the room that shifted from deep violet to pale blue, in cycles that Cole suspected were meant to mimic some Kelthani version of day and night. The bed was too long and too wide and shaped for a body with 4 arms, and he lay on it diagonally like a man sleeping on a continent. He could not leave, not because the door was locked, it was not, but because the Ankai claim gave Vashra legal precedent to hold him as mate-line kin, a status that his translator described in 12 dense paragraphs of Kelthani legal code that boiled down to one simple truth. He was not a prisoner, and he was not free, and the space between those two things was exactly large enough to drive a man insane. On the 3rd night, he stopped trying to sleep and started working. The data chip from the cryopod connected to his portable terminal with an adapter he built from parts stripped out of the Hatchet's secondary nav system. And the information that spilled across his screen was a mess. Half Kelthani biological encoding, half human medical data. All of it fragmented and corrupted and 35 years out of date. He sat on the floor with the terminal in his lap, and he sorted data the way he sorted salvage. By weight, by type, by what might be worth something, and what was just debris. Elias Maddox. His father. The records on Titan said mining accident, said body unrecoverable, said closed casket funeral attended by 11 people, including a woman holding a 2-year-old boy who would grow up to strip dead ships for a living. The data chip said something else entirely. The data chip said Elias Maddox had been on this ship. This very ship, the derelict that Cole had cut into 3 days ago, and that he had been here, not as a prisoner, and not as a guest, but as something. The Keltani language, described with a word that Cole's translator could only render as the one who completes. He read until his eyes burned, and then he read more, because burning eyes were better than the alternative, which was closing them and seeing his mother's face, and the way she never talked about his father, except in the past tense. Past tense so hard and so final that young Cole had learned not to ask. The fourth day, he went looking for archives. The flagship had a library, or rather, the flagship had a section of itself that functioned as a library. A vast organic chamber where data was stored not in servers, but in the walls themselves, encoded in the bioluminescent patterns of living tissue that remembered everything. Cole walked into it and found Sarah already there. She was sitting on the floor, with her back against a wall that pulsed gently with stored information, and she was reading something on a display that grew from the floor like a mushroom made of light. She looked up when he entered. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "You are here for the same thing I am," she said, and her voice was clipped and precise and carried an accent that Cole's translator could not place because it was not linguistic. It was the sound of someone who had learned to speak as a weapon and had not yet discovered it could be anything else. "Probably," Cole said. "My mother will not answer my questions," Sarah said. "She has not answered them for 19 years. I do not expect today to be different." "What questions?" Sarah's bioluminescence flickered, fast, jagged, a pattern Cole had started to read as agitation. "What I am," she said, "what the other half of me is. They have a word for it here, taven, and it means half-blooded, and they say it when they think I am not listening, and sometimes when they know I am." She looked at Cole's face, his jaw, his mouth, the specific architecture of features she had seen in no mirror and no database until 3 days ago. "You have answers in that chip," she said. "Fragments," Cole said. "Corrupted data. Half of it in a format I cannot read. I can read it." That was how it started. Not with trust and not with warmth, but with a shared need that was shaped like a wound and pointed in the same direction. They worked side by side in the archive, Sarah decoding the Kelthani biological data, Cole cross-referencing the human medical files with every salvage database and public record he could access through the flagship's communication relays. It took 6 days. On the 6th day, they found it. Elias Maddox had not died on Titan. Elias Maddox had been recruited, selected, targeted, acquired by a human black operations program designated Chimera. Chimera's purpose was stated in language so clinical it made Cole's skin crawl. To investigate and exploit cross-species genetic compatibility mechanisms, with emphasis on the Kelthani-Ankai bonding protocol, for the purpose of establishing covert diplomatic and biological leverage. They had discovered that the Ankai was real, that the Kelthani could form genuine biological bonds with compatible humans, and they wanted to understand it, control it, weaponize it. Elias was the proof of concept. The records were sparse, but what they said was enough. Chimera identified Elias as genetically compatible with Vashra Kelthani through methods the file did not describe, and they brokered a deal, not with the Kelthani public, not with the Dominion court, but with a back-channel contact who arranged for Elias to be placed within proximity of the Queen. The bond activated on its own. That part was real. The Ankai was not something you could fake, but the circumstances were manufactured. Elias was a gift wrapped in biology and delivered with a political price tag that neither he nor Vashra were told about. He lived in the Dominion for 2 cycles. He loved the Queen, or the bond made him love her, and Cole suspected the distinction mattered less than either species wanted to admit. Sarah was conceived, and then the political winds shifted, the back channel collapsed, a new administration took power on Earth, and Chimera decided that a human embedded in the Kelthani royal family was no longer an asset, but a liability. They extracted him. The file used that word, extracted, as if Elias was a tooth, and not a man with a bondmate, and an infant daughter, and a life that had grown roots in alien soil. They wiped his trail, fabricated the Titan mining accident, and sent him back to Earth, where he married a woman named Claire and had a son named Cole. He died 4 years later of what the medical records called systemic organ failure of unknown etiology, and what Cole, reading the Chimera medical files, now understood was bond severance syndrome, the biological consequence of being ripped away from an on-Chi mate. His father had not died in a mining accident. His father had died of a broken bond that his own species inflicted on him for political convenience. Cole sat on the archive floor with the data in his lap, and he did not move for a long time. Sarah sat across from him, and her bioluminescence was flickering, fast, arrhythmic, the Kelthani equivalent of hands that could not stop shaking. And she was reading the same data from the other side, seeing the same betrayal from the other end of the same wound. Her mother had not been abandoned. Her mother had been robbed. And the thing that was taken was not just a mate, but the truth of what had happened to him. And Vashra Kelthani had spent 35 years holding the shape of a queen who does not break, because breaking was a luxury that 41 star systems could not afford. Cole looked at the ship. Designation on the Chimera file, a hull class number, a manufacturing code, a registry that belonged to a type of covert vessel he had seen before. He had seen it 6 times. He had cut into ships just like it, stripped their nav cores, pulled their wiring, sold their bones for scrap. "I know this hull class," he said, and his voice was flat and steady, and it sounded like a man making a decision that was going to cost him everything he had left. "I have salvaged 6 of them." Sarah looked at him. "Then you know where they come from," she said. "I know where they break," Cole said, and the difference between those two things was the difference between a question and an answer. And that is better. That night, Vashra summoned him. Not to the throne room, to a chamber that was small and warm and private, a space that did not feel like a queen's room, but like a person's room, and the difference hit Cole in the chest like a fist. She stood by a viewport that looked out at stars Cole did not recognize, and she did not turn when he entered. "He said something to me," she said, and her voice was stripped of everything that made it royal, everything that made it a decree. "The night before he was taken, he said something in your language that I have held for 35 years without understanding." She spoke the words in English. The accent was wrong, and the pronunciation was fractured. And it did not matter, because Cole understood them instantly. They were the same words his mother used to say when she thought he was asleep. He did not translate them for the queen. He did not need to. She already knew what they meant, not in language, but in the way they felt in her mouth, in the shape they made in the air, in the 35 years of holding them without letting go. Cole stood in the small room with the queen of 41 star systems, and he did not speak because some things do not survive being said out loud. The stars turned outside the viewport. The ship breathed. The words hung between them, like a bridge that had been burning for 35 years and still somehow held. Cole knew how things came apart. That was not a skill they taught in any school or military program or pilot academy. It was something you learned by spending 15 years cutting into dead ships with a torch and a prayer, pulling them open rib by rib, learning where the welds failed and where the bolts sheared and where the designers had taken shortcuts that the universe would eventually collect on. He knew 6 Chimera-class hulls by their bones. He knew their pressure points, their blind spots, the exact gauge of plating on their ventral sections where the manufacturer had saved money and left a seam that a cutting torch could open in 40 seconds flat. So when the Chimera file gave him a set of coordinates, a covert installation hidden in the asteroid belt of a dead system, 3 jumps from Kelthani space. He did not think about whether he could get in. He thought about where it would break. The Queen offered a war fleet. Cole refused. Not out of pride, out of math. The cold, simple arithmetic of interspecies politics that even a salvager from the Rust Belt could calculate. If a Kelthani war fleet struck a human installation, it was an act of war. And the 12 test subjects inside that installation, and every secret Chimera had buried, would disappear in the fire before anyone could pull them out. This had to be done by a human. That was the entire point. That was the thing that made it matter. Sarah did not ask permission. She was waiting at the hatchet's airlock when Cole arrived, standing with her arms, 2, not 4, another mark of her half-blood status that the court whispered about, folded across her chest, her bioluminescence dimmed to almost nothing, her jaw set in an expression that Cole recognized because it was his expression, the one that meant the conversation is over, and the decision is made, and you are welcome to argue with this wall. Alone, she said. It is a human installation, Cole said. You are not human. I am half human, she said, and the way she said it, blunt, hard, like a door being kicked open from the inside, was the first time Cole had heard her claim that half of herself without flinching. He looked at her for a long moment. Can you fit through a ventral maintenance hatch? He asked. I will fit. It is going to be tight. I said I will fit. She fit. Barely, her shoulders scraped the sides, and her cranial plating caught on a conduit junction, and she said a word in Kelthani that Cole's translator refused to render, but that he understood perfectly from context. They came in through the belly of the station. Cole had mapped the entry in his head during the 3-day jump, running the hull specs against his memory of every Chimera-class vessel he had stripped, building a ghost blueprint from salvage records and educated guesses. Bone-deep instinct of a man who had spent his adult life finding the seams in things. The station was alive, powered, staffed, running hot in a system that every star chart listed as dead and empty. Someone was paying to keep the lights on and the gravity running and the communications dark, and that someone had been doing it for 30 years. They moved through maintenance corridors that smelled like recycled air, an industrial cleaner, human smells, familiar smells, and Cole found himself steadied by them in a way that surprised him, because he had spent the last 2 weeks surrounded by alien biology and had not realized how much he missed the simple stink of human engineering. Sarah moved behind him, and she was quiet in a way that was not stealth, but attention. Every surface, every panel, every bolt and weld and rivet getting catalogued by eyes that were learning to see the human half of their inheritance for the first time. Builds, she said, and it was not a question and not a judgment. It was the voice of someone solving an equation they had been working on for 19 years. This is what my species builds when it is scared, Cole said. There is a difference. What does it build when it is not scared? Cole thought about that as they moved through a junction that led to the station's central hub. Bridges, he said. We build bridges, and then sometimes we set them on fire because we get scared again. Pull. The central hub was a laboratory. Cole had expected that, but expecting it and seeing it were 2 different countries, and the border between them was guarded by a feeling in his stomach that was not nausea, but something older, the recognition of a wrong thing, a broken thing, a thing that should not exist. 12 cryopods lined the far wall, human occupants, vital signs active, faces visible through frosted glass. 12 people. 12 tests. The pods were connected to a central processing unit that hummed with a frequency Cole could feel in his teeth, and the data streams flowing between the pods and the processor were encoded in the same hybrid format he had found on the derelict, half Kelthani biological, half-human medical. Chimera had not ended when they pulled Elias out. Chimera had evolved. The databanks along the walls held genetic material, Calthani royal line DNA, stolen over decades through methods the files described with words like acquired and obtained that did the heavy lifting of not saying stolen. And at the center of the processing system, running like a heartbeat beneath everything else, was the operating AI, the core program that managed every experiment and every subject and every data point. Its foundational dataset was Elias Maddox's original intake file. Cole's father was the template. Every experiment since, every subject in those 12 pods, was a variation on Elias, a new attempt to replicate the fluke of genetic compatibility that had bonded a man from Earth to a queen from another star. Sarah stood in front of the databanks, and her bioluminescence was doing something Cole had not seen before. Not flickering, not pulsing, but cycling through frequencies so fast it looked like static, like a signal trying to resolve into something clear and failing. "This is what they did," she said, and her voice was flat, controlled, held together with the same kind of welding that held the station together. Functional, but not pretty, and not built to last. "This is what we did," Cole said, because the we mattered, because claiming the ugliness was the first step toward cleaning it up. She turned to him, and for a moment her face, his face, half of it, the jaw and the mouth and the eyes that were Elias and were Cole and were hers, showed something that was not anger and not grief, but the place where those two things meet and produce a third thing that has no name. "Your species felt small," she said, "and instead of reaching out, you reached in, into us, into our biology, into the thing that makes us bond, and you tried to take it. Yes, and my mother was part of that. Your mother was a target, she did not know, and my father, your father was a tool, he did not know either." Sarah's bioluminescence steadied, not calm, not resolved, just decided, the way a blade is steady when it has chosen its direction. "And you," she said, "what are you?" Cole looked at the 12 pods and the databanks and the humming processor running his father's ghost like a program that would not quit. "I am the guy who knows where this breaks," he said. He found Elias's quarters in the east wing. A bunk, a footlocker, a space so small it made the Hatchet's cabin look like a ballroom. Inside the footlocker, beneath a folded uniform, and a set of tools that Cole recognized as salvage grade because his father had apparently been that kind of man too, was a photograph. Paper. Analog. A woman holding a baby. Cole's mother, Claire, holding Cole. On the back, in handwriting Cole had never seen, but recognized the way you recognize your own heartbeat, heard from outside your body. 5 words. "I will come home." He had not. Whatever Chimera did to extract him, wherever they sent him, however they rewired his life into the shape of a mining accident and a quiet death on Earth, he had carried this promise in a footlocker on a station that was never supposed to be found. Cole put the photograph in his jacket pocket. He walked back to the central hub. He sat down at the communications terminal and he entered 3 sets of coordinates: the Calthani Dominion, the United Earth Council, and every independent news relay in the sector. Then he transmitted everything: station's location, Chimera's files, the 12 subjects, the genetic banks, the operating AI, all of it, to all 3 simultaneously. Sarah watched him do it. "They will come for you," she said. "Both sides." "Yeah," Cole said. "You have no fleet, and no weapons, and no political status." "I have a transmission log that half the galaxy just received," Cole said. And he leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling that was human-built and human-lit and humming with human electricity. You cannot bury a grave if everyone is already looking at it. The station's communication array pulsed once, a confirmation signal, a timestamp, a record that could not be deleted because it had already been copied 10,000 times across 10,000 relays. Cole looked at the photograph in his pocket. "I will come home." He could not bring his father back. but he could make sure the world that killed him had to say it out loud. The galaxy cracked down the middle, and Cole Maddox was standing on the fault line. The United Earth Council disavowed Chimera within 6 hours of the transmission. A press conference filled with words like unauthorized and rogue element and deeply committed to interspecies cooperation, delivered by officials whose faces held the specific kind of calm that meant someone off camera was having a very bad day. The Kelthani Dominion split like a bone struck wrong. Half the court demanded military response, war fleets repositioned along human border systems, ambassadors recalled from 3 neutral stations, and the other half wanted silence, containment. The 12 recovered humans returned quietly, and the wounds sewn shut before it could scar in public. Vashra held both halves together, by will alone. Cole had seen load-bearing walls and salvage that looked like that. Still upright, still holding, but cracked in places that meant one more tremor, and the whole. He sat in his quarters on the flagship and watched the political collapse play out on 6 different news feeds. Human and Kelthani and 3 neutral species who covered the story with the barely concealed glee of neighbors watching a house fire they were glad was not theirs. His face was everywhere. The salvager who cracked open a 35-year conspiracy, the man with the dead father and the alien sister and a name that both species were now trying to decide what to do with. Earth wanted him extradited, not arrested, they were careful to say, just returned for debriefing, just brought home where he belonged. And the word belonged carried a weight that made Cole's teeth hurt. The Dominion wanted him claimed, mate-line kin under the Ankai, which would make him legally Kelthani, which would make him untouchable by human jurisdiction, which would also make him a political weapon pointed at the species he was born into. Neither option was a choice. Both were cages with different paint. On the 7th day after the transmission, Vashra summoned him, not to the small room this time, to a chamber that Cole had not seen before, a space that sat between the throne room and the private quarters, a room that was neither public nor personal, but something in between. She stood in the center of it, and she was alone. No advisors, no guards, no court watching from the wings. Her bioluminescence was low, steady, but low, like a fire that has been burning so long it has forgotten how to be bright. I am offering you the Ankai recognition, she said, and her voice was the voice of a queen, but the pace was the pace of a woman choosing her words the way a surgeon chooses incisions. Not as a mate, that bond belonged to Elias, and it died with him, but as kin of line, blood recognized, protected under Dominion law across 41 systems. Cole understood what she was offering: safety, permanence, a name that carried weight in a civilization that measured names the way humans measured currency. He also understood what it cost. Earth, gone. Not as a place he could visit, but as a place that had any claim on him, any right to call him home, any authority over the man he was or the things he might do next. He looked at Vashra Kelthani, this woman who had loved his father, or been bonded to his father, or both, who had carried a daughter alone for 19 years while a court whispered Taven behind her back, who had held herself like architecture because the alternative was collapsing, and queens do not collapse, not in front of 41 star systems. No, he said. Her bioluminescence did not change. She had expected this. He suspected she had hoped for it. I have a different idea, he said. The formal proposal took 3 days to draft because Cole wrote it himself, and he was a salvager, not a diplomat, and the language kept coming out wrong in ways that his translator flagged as culturally inappropriate and potentially insulting, and once as technically a declaration of war. He rewrote it 11 times. Sarah helped with the 12th draft, not because he asked, but because she appeared in his quarters on the 3rd morning with a Kelthani legal codex and the expression of a woman who had decided that watching him fail was no longer entertaining. You cannot use the word deal in a formal address to the Dominion court, she said, It implies commercial transaction. The closest acceptable term is kelvon, which means an offering made between equals who expect nothing. That is exactly what I mean. Then use the right word. He used the right word. The proposal was simple in the way that simple things are terrifying. Cole Maddox would serve as the first human diplomatic attaché to the Kelthani Dominion. Mate line kin, not as blood recognized, not as anything Kelthani at all, but as a citizen of Earth, with full transparency and zero classified status. Every meeting recorded. Every conversation logged. Every negotiation conducted in the open, where both species could see it and judge it and argue about it in their respective media cycles. He would be the thing Chimera tried to build in a basement, a bridge between human and Kelthani, but he would do it standing in daylight, with no walls around him and no secrets underneath. The Kelthani court did not know what to do with this. An advisor called it strategically incoherent, a position of maximum exposure with minimum protection, a man offering to stand between two civilizations with nothing but his name and a transmission log. Cole stood in the throne room and delivered the proposal in English because his Kelthani was still terrible, and because the point was not to speak their language, but to speak his own clearly in a room full of people who had every reason to distrust it. My father was used as a secret, he said, and his voice carried in the cathedral space the way voices carry in places built for things larger than the people speaking in them. He was a secret kept by humans and a secret kept from the Dominion. And the secret killed him, and it hurt everyone it touched for 35 years. He looked at Vashra. I am not a secret, he said. I am standing here in your court, in your space, wearing the face of a man you loved. And I am asking to stay, not as something hidden, not as something claimed, but as something visible. The court was silent. The bioluminescence of 300 Kelthani pulsed in rhythms that Cole could not read, but that felt, in some deep mammalian way, like held breath. My species is small, he said. We are new to this, to your stars, to your politics, to the reality that we are not alone. Not alone means we have to be better than what we built in that station. He paused. I am not better, he said. I am a salvager from Earth who was 3 months behind on docking fees, and who spent the last 2 weeks learning that everything he knew about his own father was a lie. I am not the best humanity has to offer. He looked at the court, at the hundreds of faces that were not human, but were alive and watching and waiting. But I am here, he said, and I am not leaving, and I am not hiding, and that is the most human thing I know how to do. Vashra Keltani looked at him from the throne that grew from the bones of her ship. Her bioluminescence pulsed once, deep, slow, the same rhythm Cole had felt in his chest the first day. She ratified the proposal with the Dominion seal. Cole signed with a pen because he was old-fashioned, and because his mother had taught him that things that matter should be written by hand. Was broadcast across 41 star systems and 6 human relay networks. Sarah was in the gallery. She stood among the court, taller than most of them, and different from all of them, and watching with eyes that were Cole's eyes, Elias's eyes, set in a face that finally had a name for the other half of itself. Cole looked up at her. He did not wave, and he did not nod, and he did not smile. He held her gaze for a beat longer than protocol allowed. Not a greeting, and not a farewell, but a statement made in the only language that did not need a translator. I see you. I am not leaving. Sarah's bioluminescence steadied. For the first time since Cole had met her, for the first time he suspected, in her life, it was not flickering, not cycling, not searching for a frequency it could not find. It was steady, a single clear, unwavering pulse. That night, Cole sat on the edge of his bunk, in the quarters he had chosen. Royal suite, human-scaled, a space that fit him rather than dwarfed him. He pinned the photograph to the wall above the bunk. Claire Maddox holding a baby. The handwriting on the back, I will come home. Cole looked at it for a long time. The ship breathed around him, warm, alive, alien, and the stars outside the viewport were not the stars he grew up under. But they were stars, and they were there, and that was enough. Elias Maddox had written a promise he could not keep. His son was keeping it for him, not by returning to Earth, by standing in the open, in the light, in the gap between two species that had spent 35 years building walls out of secrets, by being visible, by being here. Cole leaned back on the bunk and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, since the crew, since the dark ship, since the door he welded shut inside his own head, he did not count bolts before. Sleeping. He did not need to. He was already home.